If you're asking how language and culture have evolved and taken shape across Europe, this series aims to answer exactly that. We'll begin with the roots of PIE, that's short for Proto-Indo-European, the ancestral language from which most European languages descend. From there, we'll trace how it splintered, adapted, and helped form not just words, but identities. This story stretches beyond Europe into India, the Middle East, and other regions, connecting nearly 3.5 billion people today. That includes English, Russian, Persian, Bengali, and many more we won't have time to cover in full. William Jones, a British judge serving in Calcutta during British rule in India, played a major role in piecing this together. While studying Sanskrit, he noticed structural similarities between it and classical languages like Latin and Greek. These weren't coincidences, they pointed to a shared origin. That insight eventually led scholars to reconstruct Proto-Indo-European, a theoretical language never recorded, but partially recovered through linguistic patterns. You might be asking, how can someone in London speak a language connected to someone in India? Or, where did this ancestral language even come from? English and Hindi are clearly different, but they share deep linguistic roots. And according to the leading theory, Proto-Indo-European likely began somewhere around the Pontic-Caspian steppe, vast plains stretching north of the Black and Caspian Seas. This series is ambitiously the most complex project I've worked on. To keep things focused, I'll concentrate mainly on Europe, rather than diving into the eastern offshoots like Iranian or Indic languages. Proto-Indo-European is believed to have emerged between 4,500 and 3,500 BCE with the Yamnaya culture. What made Proto-Indo-European so mobile was less about the language itself and more about the people who carried it. The Yamnaya were nomadic, relied heavily on horses, still unknown in most of Europe at the time, and helped spread not only language but practices like burial customs, metalworking, and new technologies such as the wheel. The Yamnaya began to spread outward, some moving south into the Balkans and Asia Minor, others pushing west toward regions that are now Germany and France. Before their arrival, Europe was dominated by Neolithic cultures, societies centered on agriculture, stone tools, and megalithic architecture. Around the same time Proto-Indo-European was forming, these Neolithic groups began transitioning into what we call Chalcolithic or Copper Age cultures. One of the most notable of these was the Bell Beaker culture, likely originating in Iberia between 2800 and 2500 BCE. The Bell Beakers expanded eastward into France, Germany, Britain, Italy, and even parts of North Africa. As they moved, they encountered another emerging group, the Corded Ware culture. This culture developed from a fusion of incoming Yamnaya groups and local Neolithic populations. It became a key vessel for the spread of Indo-European across Central and Northern Europe. Within the Corded Ware culture, early speakers of Indo-European began mixing with other communities, gradually giving rise to the proto-languages that would later branch into Celtic, Italic, Germanic, and others. We'll explore each of those in more detail as the series progresses. Meanwhile, the Eastern Mediterranean was a hub of cultural activity, home to some of the world's earliest civilizations, including the Egyptians, Minoans, and various Mesopotamian societies. In the mid-3rd millennium BCE, some Proto-Indo-speaking groups migrated into Anatolia. Over time, they developed a distinct and now extinct branch known as Proto-Anatolian. By the mid-2nd millennium BCE, one of Proto-Anatolian's daughter languages gave rise to the Hittite Empire, a major power that dominated much of Asia Minor and extended influence into the Levant for the remainder of the millennium. Around the same time, another major Proto-Indo-European offshoot emerged in the Balkans, known collectively as Paleo-Balkan. This branch produced several subgroups, including Albanoid, Daco-Thracian, and Greco-Phrygian, each spreading across different regions of the Balkan Peninsula. In mainland Greece, the Mycenaeans became the dominant force, building a warrior-based society rooted in early forms of Greek. To the south, the Cycladic and Minoan civilizations flourished across the Aegean, showcasing advanced art, architecture, and trade networks. By the middle of the second millennium BCE, the Mycenaeans had conquered Crete, blending with Minoan culture to lay the foundation for what would become the Greek language. However, the Greek spoken at that time was still very different from the classical Greek of later centuries. The Iliad and the Odyssey, traditionally attributed to Homer, likely reflect stories originating from the Mycenaean world, even if composed centuries later in a more developed form of the language. Toward the end of the second millennium BCE, several major civilizations, including the Mycenaeans, Egyptians, and Hittites, collapsed in rapid succession. This event is now known as the Bronze Age collapse. In the ancient Near East, copper was relatively abundant, but tin was scarce. To manufacture bronze, societies needed both. Maritime cultures like the Minoans sailed to Western Europe to acquire tin, which they then combined with copper back home before trading the finished bronze throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Around 1200 BCE, a mysterious confederation of seaborne raiders, referred to by modern historians as the Sea Peoples, launched a series of invasions that destabilized the region. Theories about their origins point to areas in Italy, Greece, and Asia Minor. Among them were likely the Philistines, who later settled in the Levant. Two major consequences followed. First, iron began to replace bronze as the dominant material for tools and weapons, largely because the tin trade had become unreliable. Second, new maritime powers rose in the vacuum, most notably the Phoenicians, who expanded their trading networks and began seeking alternative sources of tin, metals, and luxury goods across the Mediterranean. The Urnfield culture, which spread across much of Central Europe around 1300 to 750 BCE, is often associated with early Italo-Celtic speakers. From their homeland, they ranged widely, from Poland and Britain to the Balkans and even into southeastern Spain. Out of this tradition emerged the Hallstatt culture of Central Europe, generally seen as Proto-Celtic, laying the foundations for the great Celtic expansion that followed. By the 5th century BCE, the Latin culture had taken shape, unambiguously Celtic in character. From Latin, distinctive groups arose: Celtiberians in Spain, Gauls in France, Britons across the Channel, and peoples such as the Boii and Scordisci further east. The Celts spread so widely that they caught the attention of Phoenician traders, Greek historians, and Roman chroniclers for centuries. One dramatic episode came in the 3rd century BCE, when a large Celtic force stormed into the Balkans and nearly captured Delphi itself. Though they failed, their ferocity impressed the ancient world. Soon after, King Nicomedes I of Bithynia invited Celtic warriors as mercenaries to fight in his dynastic struggles. Those who remained were granted land, giving rise to the Celtic province of Galatia in Asia Minor, a lasting reminder of their wanderings and influence. The Germanic branch of Indo-European arose alongside Italic and Celtic from their common Proto-Indo-European roots. Around 2900 BCE, migrating Yamnaya-related groups entered northern and central Europe to form the corded ware culture. In southern Scandinavia, that culture morphed into the battle axe culture, known for its distinctive axes and burial rites, which then fused with local pitted ware societies by about 2300 BCE, giving rise to the Nordic Bronze Age. It was during this era and through the pre-Roman Iron Age that Proto-Germanic evolved, taking shape across southern Scandinavia and northern Germany. By the 6th century BCE, the Jastorf culture, centered in northern Germany and extending into Jutland, emerged as the first clearly identifiable Germanic archaeological horizon. From this core, Germanic influence spread into adjacent territories. Unlike the more contact-rich Italic and Celtic regions, Proto-Germanic developed in a comparatively insular environment, allowing its characteristic sound shifts, like those summarized in Grimm's Law, to crystallize before later diversification. The corded ware culture, which spread widely across Europe between 3000 and 2300 BCE, expanded not only westward but also north and east into the regions of Belarus, western Russia, the Baltic states, and northern Ukraine. In these areas, corded ware groups encountered the indigenous comb ceramic culture, often associated with the distant ancestors of Uralic-speaking peoples such as the Finns, Estonians, Karelians, and Permians. While the precise origins of the Uralic languages remain debated, these interactions appear to have influenced the Indo-European newcomers and contributed to the emergence of early Balto-Slavic speech forms. This pre-Proto-Balto-Slavic identity took clearer shape within the Trojaniac culture 1600 to 1200 BCE, which occupied territories stretching across Poland, Belarus, and western Ukraine. By around 500 BCE, the Balto-Slavic peoples had begun to diverge into two distinct groups: the Balts, who lived around the Baltic Sea and into parts of Poland and Russia, and the Slavs, who remained centered in western Ukraine and southern Belarus. Though Roman authors occasionally reference peoples from these regions, the Slavs themselves played little part in Roman affairs and did not become prominent in written history until after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE. The Phoenicians, who rose to prominence after the collapse of the Bronze Age, had long existed within the spheres of Egypt and the Hittite Empire, serving as intermediaries in the trade of copper and tin that fueled the Mediterranean's bronze economy. With the fall of these great powers around the 12th century BCE, the Phoenicians gained autonomy and built a far-reaching commercial network of their own, establishing trade outposts that stretched from Iberia and North Africa to the Aegean and islands such as Sicily and the Balearics, with some evidence suggesting contacts as distant as Cornwall in Britain. By the 9th century BCE, their Levantine homeland came under the control of successive empires, the Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians. Yet Phoenician influence endured through their colonies, especially Carthage in modern Tunisia, which grew into the center of Punic civilization. The Punic peoples spoke a Semitic language, and while Semitic linguistic influence in Europe is more strongly tied to the Jewish diaspora in the Roman era, Phoenician culture profoundly shaped Mediterranean civilization. Their alphabet provided the foundation for Greek, Etruscan, and Latin scripts. Their models of commerce, shipbuilding, government, and naval warfare were adopted by neighboring Greeks and Romans, and their maritime trade networks helped spread new technologies, metallurgy, and industries into Europe. In this way, the Phoenicians not only connected the Mediterranean world, but also paved the way for Rome's later dominance of the sea after the Punic Wars. While the Phoenicians dominated much of the Mediterranean during the first millennium BCE, they increasingly faced competition from the Greeks. The Mycenaean civilization, which had flourished during the late Bronze Age, collapsed around 1200 BCE, leading to what historians call the Greek Dark Ages, a period lasting nearly 3 centuries. Population declined, trade networks contracted, and the Mycenaean writing system vanished. Many Greeks fled from the mainland to settle in the Aegean islands and along the coast of Anatolia. Despite these setbacks, Greek religion and language endured, preserving continuity with their Bronze Age past. Centuries later, around the 9th or 8th century BCE, the Greeks adopted and adapted the Semitic alphabet used by Phoenician traders. Unlike earlier scripts, this new system introduced symbols for vowel sounds, creating the first true phonetic alphabet and laying the foundation for Greek literacy and literature. By the 8th century BCE, Greece entered the Archaic period, defined by the rise of the polis, or city-state. Athens, Corinth, Sparta, and countless others developed as independent political communities, each with its own laws, armies, and civic identity. Overpopulation and internal rivalries at home, combined with opportunities for trade abroad and a cultural ethos rooted in Homeric ideals of adventure and heroism, pushed the Greeks outward across the Mediterranean. Colonies appeared on nearly every shore: Massalia in southern France, Byzantium on the Bosporus, Magna Graecia in southern Italy, and many more. By this time, Greek was spoken from Crimea to Spain, uniting far-flung communities in a common language and culture, even as they remained politically independent. Each polis also claimed its own patron deity: Athens for Athena, Sparta for Apollo, and Hermopolis for Hermes, further reinforcing civic pride. By 500 BCE, there were at least 700 such city-states, a fragmented but vibrant world in which Athens and Sparta emerged as the most powerful. In the early 5th century BCE, the Greeks faced an existential threat from the Persian Empire. The Persian invasions brought destruction to many poli, yet they also prompted rare unity among Athens, Sparta, and their allies, who together repelled the Persians at battles such as Marathon, Salamis, and Plataea. Once the Persians retreated, however, rivalries quickly resurfaced. Athens consolidated its power through the Delian League, transforming what had begun as an anti-Persian alliance into its own maritime empire. Sparta, leading the Peloponnesian League, stood as Athens' chief rival. The resulting Peloponnesian War consumed Greece for nearly 3 decades, pitting Athens' naval strength and democratic ideals against Sparta's militarism and oligarchy. Sparta ultimately claimed victory, but the conflict left the entire Greek world weakened and divided. Meanwhile, in the north, the kingdom of Macedon was rising under Philip II. A skilled general and statesman, Philip reorganized the Macedonian army and extended his influence southward, ultimately defeating the Greek city-states at the Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE. For the first time, most of Greece was united under a single ruler, yet Philip was assassinated in 336 BCE, leaving the throne to his 20-year-old son, Alexander III. Within a decade, Alexander, known to history as Alexander the Great, launched one of the most remarkable conquests in history, defeating the Persian Empire and extending Greek power across the Near East, Egypt, and as far as India. His campaigns spread Greek culture, language, and institutions on an unprecedented scale, ushering in the Hellenistic Age. But Alexander's empire was short-lived. He died suddenly in 323 BCE, and his generals divided his vast territories. The Ptolemies ruled in Egypt, the Seleucids controlled the Near East, and the Antigonids held Macedon and parts of the Aegean. These kingdoms remained powerful for centuries, blending Greek and local traditions, but constant rivalries eroded their strength. In time, they were overshadowed and eventually absorbed by the expanding Roman Republic, which inherited much of the Greek world even as it laid the foundations for its own Mediterranean empire.